Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. There are some games where a player breaks a record or surpasses a huge milestone in NFL history, and they play lights out while doing so. You had New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees set the NFL record for most career touchdown passes in a 2019 Monday Night Football game against the Indianapolis Colts. And he did it in a winning effort while completing over 96% of his passes, going 29 for 30 with 307 yards and 4 touchdowns. You had Dallas Cowboys running back Emmitt Smith break Walter Payton's career rushing yardage record, and he did it in a game against the Seattle Seahawks, where even though the Cowboys lost, he had over 100 yards rushing on over 4.5 yards per carry, and he scored a touchdown. I could go on and on about some of the best games by players when they broke a record. This is not one of them. This is a moment where a player broke a record and surpassed a huge milestone in the record books, but did it by playing the worst football of his entire career. This is Indianapolis Colts running back Eric Dickerson. In a 1991 game against the Detroit Lions, he further cemented his place in NFL history by climbing up the all-time rushing leaderboard, which everyone knew was coming and everyone was looking forward to. In that same game, he also laid a big fat goose egg and had an absolute clunker of a game. This is the story behind Eric Dickerson and the worst record-breaking game by a running back in the history of the NFL. Before I talk about the game and the record in question, we need some context to understand who Eric Dickerson was, and how close he was to etching his name even further in the storied history of the National Football League. I think it's safe to say that Eric Dickerson is one of the greatest running backs in the history of the sport. Everyone has him inside their top 10. Most people have him inside their top 5. And you've got some people who think that he's the greatest running back to ever play. The accolades that he racked up throughout his entire career are plentiful and bountiful in number, and I would be here all day if I listed every single one of his accomplishments, because he was that good. However, here are some of the highlights to show just how good he was. When Dickerson was drafted in 1983, he led the league with 1,808 rushing yards, and was named the Offensive Rookie of the Year in the process. He followed that up in 1984 by somehow putting up even better numbers, and almost single-handedly carrying the Los Angeles Rams offense to the postseason by having what many consider to be the greatest season by a running back in the history of the NFL. He finished the 1984 season with an NFL record 2,105 rushing yards, and he would have run away with Offensive Player of the Year if it wasn't for the fact that Dan Marino was putting up numbers down in Miami that were unheard of for the quarterback position. He led the league in rushing yards again in 1986 with 1,821 yards, and was named the Offensive Player of the Year. And as a member of the Indianapolis Colts in 1988, he led the league with 1,659 rushing yards. Entering the 1991 season, here's where Dickerson stood. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler and a 5-time First-Team All-Pro. He was a member of the All-1980s First Team. He led the league in rushing yards 4 times. At the time, he was only one of 4 players in NFL history, alongside Hall of Famers Jim Brown, O.J. Simpson, and Steve Van Buren, to do this. He had 3 seasons with over 1,800 rushing yards. No other player in NFL history has ever accomplished this feat. He led the league in yards from scrimmage 4 times. At the time, Jim Brown was the only other player to do this. By the early 1990s, even though Dickerson was somewhat on the decline, if you even want to call it that, he had already established himself as one of the greatest running backs of the history of the sport. And in 1991, he had a chance to establish himself even further. There was both good and bad news for Eric Dickerson heading into the 1991 season. The bad news was that he was on the Indianapolis Colts, and the Colts were god-awful. They were a dysfunctional mess off the field, and trust me, we'll get into that in a bit, although I'd probably need an hour-long video to talk about everything that happened between Dickerson and the team. And they were a dysfunctional mess on the field. Through the first 3 games of the season, they were 0-3. Ron Meyer, after some decent seasons with the team, although the team actually got worse in record each year he was there, looked completely in over his head when 1991 rolled around. Through the first 3 games, not only were the Colts winless, but they had scored just 13 points all season, which was easily the worst total in all of football. The most points they had scored in a game was 7. Their offense was that inept. If you're averaging just over 4 points per game in a 3-game stretch, that's embarrassing. The good news for Dickerson was that he seemed to be playing alright to start the year off. The Colts had a ton of problems offensively and all across the board, but at the age of 31, Dickerson didn't seem to be one of them right away. After a rough 1990 season, where he had some career-low numbers and missed some time due to a heated contract and salary dispute, he was looking alright to start off the 1991 season. Through the first 3 games, he had 201 rushing yards and 139 receiving yards. Yes, he had some fumbling issues, which was a theme throughout his career, especially early on with the Rams, but he was still pretty solid. He was on pace for another season above 1,000 rushing yards, and was on pace for over 1,800 yards from scrimmage, which would have placed him 4th in the league if it held. Obviously, I'm not suggesting this based off of a 3-game sample size at the start of the season, because when injuries and wear and tear in game plans are taken into effect, I'm not saying that Dickerson would have had that total. However, I bring this up to show just how out of left field this record-breaking game we're going to talk about in just a few minutes was, because Dickerson was still looking alright to start off that 1991 campaign. He had not fallen off a cliff. And by this point in his career, Eric Dickerson had accumulated 12,104 rushing yards. He surpassed John Riggins the previous season for 5th all-time in NFL history in this category, and now was eyeing 4th place. He wasn't going to catch Walter Payton this season, who had a commanding lead at 16,706 rushing yards. Heck, he probably wasn't ever going to catch Walter Payton. Tony Dorsett at 12,739 and Jim Brown at 12,312 were well within reach during the season if he kept this pace up. At minimum, barring anything crazy, he should be able to surpass them in 1992. But Franco Harris was next on the list, and his total was incredibly attainable for Indy's next matchup. Harris had 12,120 career rushing yards in his time with the Pittsburgh Steelers and that random stint he had in Seattle. All Dickerson needed was 17 measly yards, and he would have 4th place all time. Eric Dickerson was just 17 yards away from making history. Unfortunately for him, he would make that history in just about the worst way possible. September 22nd, 1991. It's week 4 of the NFL season, and we're at the Hoosier Dome for this interconference matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Indianapolis Colts. Yes, this early season game had implications on the standings, as the Lions were 2-1 looking to keep pace with the 3-0 Chicago Bears and the 2-1 Minnesota Vikings for the lead in the NFC Central, while the Colts were 0-3, looking to get their first win of the season and avoid having the season truly be over before the end of the first month, as an 0-4 start would be almost impossible for this team to climb out of. But the main storyline heading into this game was Eric Dickerson and his quest for history. He needed 17 yards to get 4th place all time and surpass the legendary Hall of Famer Franco Harris. The good news for Dickerson was that he got it. He broke the record. For Dickerson, this was a big milestone, especially the fact that he got it past Franco Harris. Dickerson is good friends with Harris and talked about how growing up, Harris was one of his favorite players to watch. And Dickerson talked before the season started about wanting to put up good numbers and get back in form, talking about the high standards that others set for him. As Dickerson said, it's not really other people who have to measure up to those standards. It's me. I'm the one who has to keep dishing out the great numbers no matter what. For that, this moment had to feel good. It felt like another crowning achievement in his storied career, and felt like another reminder for the record books of just how good he was. In that regard, good for Dickerson that he took 4th place and broke the record. The bad news was that the game stunk. No exaggeration, Eric Dickerson could not have picked a worse game to accomplish this milestone, because it might have been the worst of his career, and that's saying something because at that point, he had played in over 120 games. Dickerson needed just 17 rushing yards to break the record and pass Franco Harris. Want to know how many rushing yards he got? 17. It was the fewest rushing yards that Dickerson ever had in a game in his career at that point. And he got these 17 yards on 13 carries, meaning that he averaged an abysmal 1.3 yards per carry. For some perspective on how bad that is, if you gave the Colts 7 downs instead of 4 to get a first down, and all they did was hand the ball off to Eric Dickerson, they would still wind up turning it over on downs. That's how poor his performance was. But don't worry, it gets worse. Dickerson's lone really good run of the day went for 12 yards. That run came in garbage time, when the Lions were leading at 26-10 midway through the 4th quarter, and the Lions were playing a soft defense with not a lot of guys in the box, just trying to not get beat deep and keep everything underneath. Remember that back in 1991, there was no 2-point conversion, so this was a 3-possession game, making it a pretty comfortable margin considering how poor the Colts' offense was. As a side note, to learn more about a time that the Colts actually overcame a 3-possession deficit midway through the 4th quarter, click the card in the upper right corner. But Dickerson's lone really positive run was meaningless. Take his longest run out, and he had 5 rushing yards on 12 carries, averaging less than half a yard per attempt. That is atrocious, no matter how you slice it. But wait, it gets worse, because Dickerson was infamously part of this performance where the Colts finished the game with an abysmal 4 yards rushing total. That's it, 4 yards all day. It was the fewest rushing yards that the Colts ever had in a game, and they had been around for over 40 years at this point. And it was a franchise record for futility that would stand all the way up until Week 16 of the 2014 season, when in a 42-7 loss to the Dallas Cowboys, they had 1 singular rushing yard. The Colts somehow made it to the AFC Championship that year. Make it make sense to me. And again, the Colts would have had negative rushing yards if you took out the play where the Lions were in a soft defense, up by 3 possessions. But wait, it gets worse, because as you probably guessed, the Colts lost the game. I know, shocker. They wound up losing it 33-24, although the game was nowhere as close as the score might indicate, as after the Colts jumped out to a 10-0 lead in the first quarter, Detroit scored 33 of the game's next 40 points. 2 of those points even came off of a safety, where none other than Eric Dickerson got tackled in the end zone and could not escape. The loss dropped the Colts to 0-4 for the first time since 1986, and everything about this one was a disaster. Just to recap, Dickerson broke the record, which I think everyone thought he would have done in the first quarter, by just 1 yard, and did it in not only the worst game of his career, and not only in the worst rushing game in franchise history, but at what had to be the lowest point in franchise history since the team moved to Indianapolis. And after the game, as you can probably guess, Dickerson was furious and didn't care one bit about the record. It's tough to care about a personal accomplishment, even if it is something monumental like what Dickerson did, when you play an absolute stinker of a game. And afterwards, Dickerson wasn't really in a celebratory mood after dropping to 0-4, running for the fewest yards in a game in his career, along with the worst yards per carry average of his career, and getting tackled for a safety. As Dickerson said on the whole ordeal regarding the breaking of the record, it doesn't mean anything to me. Oh, it's nice. Franco was always one of my favorite players when I was growing up, but we lost the game. We're 0-4. That's what means something to me. He was in no mood for celebrating, and understandably so after a performance like that. And he was in no mood for celebrating anything else that happened in his time with the Colts. Again, I'm not going to dive too much into this because it would take a really long time to fully explain the beef that he had with the organization, but Dickerson was not a Colt after the 1991 season. He got suspended once again by the team following a dispute over practice with interim head coach Rick Venturi, was inactive for a few additional games, was on a team that went 1-15 and had the worst record in football, and finished the year with a career-worst 536 rushing yards, a career-worst 2 rushing touchdowns, and a career-worst 3.2 yards per carry. Keep in mind that Dickerson had never finished the season below 4 yards per carry before, so this truly was a nosedive, and the game against the Lions was the turning point. Sometimes, players do not play well when breaking records or moving up the record book. Look at Peyton Manning, who broke the all-time record for passing yards in 2015, and then got benched later in the game and finished with a passer rating of 0.0, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. That game will forever be the gold standard for the worst record-breaking performance across all positions. But for a running back? Yeah, I'm not sure you can do a whole lot worse than what Eric Dickerson did on this day in 1991. Between the loss and the career-low numbers, what should have been a day to remember became the ultimate day to forget. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.